I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the sink. My reflection stared back at me with hollow eyes, dark circles underneath from sleepless nights. What I was about to do would cross a line I could never uncross. But after everything they'd done to me, after the years of humiliation, the stolen dignity, the final goodbye I never got to say to my mother, maybe some lines deserved to be crossed. I looked down at the cake box sitting on the counter, perfectly wrapped with a delicate ribbon. They thought it was a peace offering. They had no idea what kind of gift I was really bringing them. And the worst part? I wasn't even sure I recognized myself anymore. If you're here, welcome to Every Smile Hides a Story. This channel is brand new, and we're bringing you real stories about real people every single day. Stories that remind us we're all human, all flawed, all capable of more than we think. If that sounds like something you need to hear, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming. 6 months earlier, I had been a completely different person. My name is Grace, and I'd just turned 23 when I took the job as a live-in housekeeper for the Morrison family. I needed the money desperately. My mother was sick, treatments were expensive, and jobs in our neighborhood paid barely enough to survive. The doctors had given us a timeline, 6 months to a year, maybe less if we couldn't afford the medications that might slow the progression of her illness. Every day I watched her fade a little more, her vibrant spirit dimming like a light on a failing battery. When Mrs. Morrison offered me the position with room and board included, I thought I'd been given a miracle. The salary she quoted was more than double what I'd been making at the diner, where my feet ached from 10-hour shifts and my pockets stayed empty after bills. I remember the day I told my mother about the job. She was sitting in her worn armchair, the one with the spring poking through that we'd never had money to fix. Her face lit up when I said the number. "Baby, that's wonderful," she whispered, her voice already getting weaker. "You take that job. You save that money. Don't you worry about me." But I did worry. I worried every second of every day. The house was massive, all white columns and manicured lawns in the kind of neighborhood where even the air felt expensive. The first time I walked up that pristine driveway, my secondhand suitcase in hand, I felt like I was entering a different world. The front door alone probably cost more than every stick of furniture in my mother's apartment. Mrs. Morrison was the type of woman who wore pearls to breakfast and never had a hair out of place. Her blonde bob was so precise it looked like it had been cut with a ruler. She had 2 daughters, Olivia, 20, and Charlotte, 18. Both beautiful, both educated at private schools I'd only seen in movies, both utterly convinced the world existed to serve them. I should have known from the first day. Mrs. Morrison looked me up and down like she was inspecting produce at the market, her lips pressed thin. Her eyes lingered on my worn shoes, my discount store clothes, the way my hair refused to lie perfectly flat despite my efforts. "You'll address me as Mrs. Morrison at all times," she said, her voice clipped and cold. "The girls are Miss Olivia and Miss Charlotte. You'll eat after the family has finished, and your quarters are in the back wing. We value privacy here." She handed me a thick folder. "These are the household rules and your daily schedule. I expect perfection, Grace. We've had help before who couldn't meet our standards. I hope you'll be different." I nodded, grateful just to have the job. I didn't see the warning signs. I was too busy calculating how many months of my mother's medication this salary could buy, how many doctor's visits, how many more precious days I might give her. I was too busy trying to survive to notice I was walking into a cage. The work itself was endless. I cleaned 4 bathrooms, 6 bedrooms, a kitchen bigger than my childhood home, and living spaces that seemed to multiply every week. The Morrison house had 17 rooms, not counting hallways and closets. Each one had to be dusted daily, vacuumed to perfection, windows spotless enough to be invisible. I cooked 3 meals a day, following elaborate recipes Mrs. Morrison left out with notes in her sharp handwriting. "The hollandaise was too thick yesterday. Do better." I laundered mountains of clothes, hand-washing the delicates, ironing even the items that would go in drawers unseen. I organized closets that were bigger than my mother's entire apartment, arranging designer shoes by color and heel height. Mrs. Morrison followed behind me with a critical eye, finding fault in invisible dust and imperfect vacuum lines. She carried a white glove, like something out of an old movie, and would run it along surfaces I'd just cleaned. "Grace, this is unacceptable," became her favorite phrase. She'd point at something I'd just cleaned and shake her head like I'd committed a crime. Once, she made me re-clean the guest bathroom 3 times because she could see a water spot on the faucet. I scrubbed until my hands were raw, until the smell of bleach made my eyes water, until finally she nodded and walked away without a word of approval. The girls were worse. They left messes deliberately, clothes strewn across floors, makeup smeared on counters, wet towels in piles. I'd clean Olivia's room in the morning, make her bed with hospital corners the way Mrs. Morrison insisted, arrange her decorative pillows just so. By afternoon, it would look like a tornado had hit. Charlotte was more creative in her cruelty. She'd eat snacks in her room despite house rules, leaving crumbs and wrappers hidden in places I'd have to search for, under the bed, behind books, inside drawers, like a twisted scavenger hunt designed to waste my time and make me look incompetent. Charlotte once dropped an entire bowl of cereal on the carpet, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Oops, that's what we pay you for, right?" Then she laughed and walked away, her designer slippers leaving milk footprints across the hardwood. I spent an hour on my hands and knees, scrubbing milk out of that white carpet, terrified it would stain and Mrs. Morrison would dock my pay. Again. The smell of spoiled milk haunted that corner of the house for days. The degradation came in small cuts at first. Comments about my accent, the way I pronounced certain words. I'd grown up in a neighborhood where people spoke differently, where language was functional rather than decorative. "Where did you even learn to speak, Grace?" Olivia asked once at dinner, covering her mouth in mock horror. Her friends were over, 3 other young women who looked at me like I was a museum exhibit. "She sounds like one of those people from the South Side," Charlotte added. They all laughed. I stood there holding a serving platter, my face burning, and said nothing. Because what could I say? They held my paycheck, my ability to help my mother, my future in their perfectly manicured hands. Mrs. Morrison would deduct money from my salary for broken dishes, even if they broke them, for using too much cleaning product, for taking too long on a task, for serving dinner 3 minutes late when traffic had delayed me at the grocery store. My paychecks got smaller every month while my hours got longer. She kept a ledger, showed it to me once with obvious satisfaction. "You see, Grace, this is what incompetence costs. If you were better at your job, you'd make what we agreed to pay you." I watched my mother's medication money shrink with each deduction, felt panic rising in my chest like floodwater. I asked for a day off to visit my mother in the hospital. It was a Tuesday, and I'd worked 16 days straight. My mother had called the night before, her voice so weak I could barely hear her. "Baby, I need to see you," she'd said. Just that. But I heard the underneath, the thing she wasn't saying. "I'm scared. I'm alone. I need my daughter." I found Mrs. Morrison in her sitting room, drinking tea from a cup that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm so sorry to bother you, but my mother is in the hospital. She's asking for me. I was hoping I could have tomorrow off to visit her." Mrs. Morrison looked at me like I'd requested a vacation to Paris. She set down her teacup with a delicate clink. "Grace, dear, we have guests coming this weekend. The house must be perfect." "Absolutely not. Your mother will understand." Her tone was final, dismissive. She picked up her magazine, clearly done with the conversation. I stood there, frozen, feeling my heart crack down the middle. "Please," I heard myself say. "She's very sick. She might not—" Mrs. Morrison looked up sharply. "Grace," I said, "no. If you can't handle the demands of this position, perhaps you're not the right fit after all. We can always find someone more dedicated." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. I needed this job. My mother needed this job. So I nodded and backed out of the room, went to my quarters, and called my mother to tell her I couldn't come. "It's okay, baby," she said. But I heard the disappointment, heard the loneliness, heard time running out in every labored breath. "I understand. You gotta keep that job. Don't worry about your mama. I'll be fine." But she wasn't fine. She was dying, and I wasn't there. The sounds of that house haunt me still. The click of Mrs. Morrison's heels on marble, always approaching to criticize. That rhythmic tap-tap-tap that made my shoulders tense, made my hands move faster, made me check and recheck every surface. Charlotte's high-pitched laugh echoing from upstairs, usually followed by some new mess I'd have to clean. The hum of the expensive appliances I cleaned but would never own. The grandfather clock in the hallway that chimed every hour, marking time I was spending away from my mother, the rustle of Mrs. Morrison's silk blouses as she inspected my work, her perfume so heavy it made me nauseous. At night, alone in my small room with its single window overlooking the garbage bins, I'd call my mother. Her voice grew weaker each time. We'd talk about small things, safe things, how the weather was, what she'd eaten that day, though I could tell she was eating less and less, what was on TV in her hospital room, anything but the truth, which was that she was slipping away, and I was trapped in a mansion, polishing silver for people who treated me like I was something they'd scraped off their shoes. "How are they treating you, baby?" she'd ask. I lied. Every time, I lied. I told her everything was fine, that the Morrisons were kind, that I was saving money, that soon I'd be able to afford better treatment for her. The lies tasted like ash, stuck in my throat like broken glass, but I couldn't tell her the truth. Couldn't tell her that her daughter was being systematically degraded, that I cried myself to sleep most nights, that I felt myself disappearing a little more each day. She had enough to carry without adding my pain to her burden. 3 months in, my mother's condition worsened. The hospital called at 2 a.m. The phone's shrill ring shattered the silence of my small room, and I knew before I answered what it meant. Nothing good happens at 2 a.m. "Miss Parker, this is County General. Your mother's had a significant decline. You should come as soon as possible." The nurse's voice was professional but kind. I heard the underneath again. "Come now. Come say goodbye. Don't wait." I found Mrs. Morrison in her silk robe, annoyed at being woken. I'd knocked on her bedroom door, my heart hammering, my hand shaking so badly I could barely grip my phone. She opened it with a scowl that deepened when she saw my tear-stained face. "Grace, what on earth?" "It's the middle of the night." Her voice was sharp with irritation, not concern. "Please," I begged. "The hospital just called. My mother, they said I need to come right away. Please, I need to go to her." Mrs. Morrison sighed like I'd asked her to solve world hunger. She actually sighed, put her hand to her forehead like I was giving her a headache. "Grace, I have a charity luncheon tomorrow that needs to be perfect. The mayor's wife will be attending. You can go this weekend if she's still." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The implication hung there, cold and cruel. "If your mother hasn't died yet, you can visit her in a few days." "But Mrs. Morrison," they said. She held up her hand. "My decision is final. Now please. Some of us need our sleep. Close the door quietly when you leave." My mother died the next afternoon at 3:47 p.m. while I was polishing silver in the Morrison dining room. I was holding a serving spoon, buffing it to a mirror shine, when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't answer. Mrs. Morrison had rules about personal phones during work hours, but something made me look. The hospital's number. I knew before I heard the words. "Miss Parker, I'm so sorry. Your mother passed peacefully about 10 minutes ago. She asked for you at the end. I'm very sorry." I stood there with that silver spoon in my hand, and something inside me shattered. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a quiet, complete breaking, like ice cracking on a frozen lake. I wasn't holding her hand when she took her last breath. I wasn't telling her I loved her, that she'd been the best mother anyone could ask for, that every good thing in me came from her. I wasn't there to make sure she wasn't afraid, wasn't alone. I was making sure forks were aligned perfectly for people who would use them once and forget they existed. Mrs. Morrison found me standing there 15 minutes later, tears running silently down my face, still holding that spoon. "Grace, are you crying? What's wrong?" Her tone suggested I'd committed some breach of protocol. I told her my mother had just died. Told her I'd begged to go last night and she'd said no. I watched her face register the information, watched her calculate the implications. "Oh," she said, "just that. Oh. Then, I'll give you the rest of the day off, but I'll need you back by tomorrow evening. We have that luncheon on Saturday, and there's too much to prepare. The rest of the day off. The rest of one day to process the loss of my mother." Mrs. Morrison gave me 4 hours for the funeral. 4 hours. She marked it on her calendar, told me I needed to be back by 2 p.m. because guests were coming at 3. 4 hours to say goodbye to the woman who raised me, who worked 3 jobs to keep me fed, who sacrificed everything so I could have a chance at something better, who deserved so much more than a daughter who wasn't there at the end, who died alone because I was too afraid of losing a job to fight for the right to be with her. The funeral was at a small church in our neighborhood, the kind with folding chairs and a leak-stained ceiling. About 15 people came. Friends from my mother's apartment building, her co-workers from the nursing home where she'd worked before getting too sick. The pastor, a kind old man who'd known my mother for years, spoke about her faith and her strength. I sat in the front row in my only black dress, the one I'd bought at a thrift store, and felt nothing. Numbness had wrapped around me like ice. When I came back to the Morrison house, red-eyed and shattered, hollow inside, Charlotte was throwing a party. Music pounded from the backyard, young voices shrieking with laughter. I walked in through the service entrance, and Charlotte intercepted me in the hallway. She was in a bikini, holding a drink with a little umbrella in it, her skin glowing with youth and health and complete lack of awareness. "Oh, Grace, you're back," she said brightly. "Perfect timing. This needs to go out." She handed me a bag of trash, heavy and leaking something sticky. "And the living room is a disaster. There's like glass everywhere." Someone dropped a bottle. "Chop chop." She actually said chop chop, while I was wearing my mother's funeral clothes, while my eyes were still swollen from crying, while the church hymns were still echoing in my head. I took the trash. I cleaned the living room, picking up shards of broken glass with my bare hands, because I couldn't find the dustpan. I scrubbed something that looked like vomit off the bathroom floor. I went to my room and cried so hard, I thought my ribs would crack, burying my face in my pillow so no one would hear. That's when something inside me started to change. Not all at once. Just a small shift, like a foundation developing a crack. The grief was overwhelming, but underneath it, something else was growing. Rage. Cold, patient rage that built slowly like pressure in a sealed container. Because I'd failed my mother. I'd let these people take the most important thing from me, and I'd let them. Because I was scared. Because I needed money. Because I'd believed what society taught me, that people like the Morrisons mattered more than people like me and my mother. That their luncheons and their silver and their perfect houses were more important than a dying woman's last request to see her daughter. The real turning point came 2 weeks later. I'd been moving through the days like a ghost, doing my work mechanically, barely speaking. The Morrisons didn't seem to notice or care that their housekeeper was quietly falling apart. Mrs. Morrison had mentioned several times that I seemed distracted and needed to focus better. Charlotte complained that I wasn't folding her towels the way she liked anymore. No one asked how I was. No one acknowledged that something fundamental had broken in me. Then the Morrisons decided to go out to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown, Chez Laurent, the kind of place where entrees cost more than I used to make in a week. They needed me to come along to watch their bags and coats. "You'll wait in the car," Mrs. Morrison instructed. "We'll be about 2 hours." But when we arrived, Charlotte changed her mind with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never had to think about consequences. Actually, she should come in. I might need her to run out and get something for me. You know, like if I need my phone charger or whatever. So I followed them inside, feeling every eye in the restaurant track my worn clothes and tired face. The hostess looked confused, uncomfortable. The restaurant was beautiful in that excessive way wealthy places are. Crystal chandeliers. White tablecloths so crisp they looked sharp. Servers in black tie. Classical music played softly. The smell of expensive food and expensive wine hung in the air. I felt like a stain on fine silk. Obviously out of place. Obviously not belonging. The hostess smiled uncertainly when the Morrisons swept in. "Good evening, Mrs. Morrison. Your table is ready." She glanced at me, then back at Mrs. Morrison. Will she be joining you?" She gestured vaguely in my direction. Mrs. Morrison laughed, that tinkling sound like breaking glass that I'd come to hate. "Oh no, she's staff. She'll just stand." The hostess's smile faltered. "Stand? I'm not sure we have—" Mrs. Morrison's voice went cold. "Is there a problem? I'm a valued customer here." The hostess flushed. "No, of course not. Right this way." I stood there for 2 hours while they ate 5 courses. Oysters, soup, salad, some kind of elaborate fish dish, dessert. They discussed their upcoming vacation to the Greek islands, complained about how hard it was to find good help these days, completely oblivious to the irony, debated whether to get a new Mercedes or stick with the BMW. My feet ached in my cheap shoes. My legs trembled from standing so still. Other diners stared, their conversations dropping to whispers when they looked our way. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed for me or by the situation. One woman took out her phone. I didn't know she was filming. None of us did. She was several tables away, but her phone was angled perfectly to capture me standing motionless behind the Morrison family like a piece of furniture while they ate and laughed. The video showed me shifting my weight slightly after the first hour, my face carefully blank. It showed Charlotte snapping her fingers at me without even turning around, making me come forward to grab her dropped napkin from the floor. It showed Mrs. Morrison waving her hand dismissively when I shifted my weight, like my discomfort was offensive to her. It showed Olivia talking on her phone, completely ignoring my existence even though I was standing close enough to hear every word of her conversation about a spa day she was planning. The caption the woman wrote was simple. "This is how the wealthy treat their workers in 2024. This woman stood for 2 hours while they ate. Never offered a chair. Never acknowledged. Treated like furniture. This is someone's daughter. Someone's sister. Someone who just lost her mother and is still expected to serve. This is wrong." The video went viral overnight. By morning, it had 3 million views. By afternoon, 10 million. By evening, it was on the news. Mrs. Morrison's phone started ringing before breakfast. At first, she didn't understand what was happening. "Some ridiculous video," she muttered, scrolling through her phone with mounting horror. Then the calls started. From the charity where she sat on the board, from her country club, from her social circle. Each one delivering the same message. Distance. We need to distance ourselves from you. This doesn't reflect our values. We're so disappointed. The fallout was immediate and devastating, spreading through their lives like wildfire. Mrs. Morrison was scheduled to speak at a women's empowerment conference the next week, giving a keynote on leadership and grace in modern society. They canceled her invitation within hours of the video going viral. The email was polite but final. "Given recent events and the optics involved, we feel it's best to part ways. We're sure you understand." She didn't understand. She raged about cancel culture, about people being too sensitive, about how she'd done nothing wrong. Olivia's fiancé, Bradley, who worked at a prestigious law firm downtown, started facing questions from partners who'd seen the video. "Is this really the family you want to marry into?" The senior partner called him into his office, closed the door, and showed him the video on his tablet. "We represent workers' rights cases, Bradley. How does this look?" Bradley started pulling away from Olivia, their conversations becoming strained and brief. Within a week, he'd suggested they take some time. Within 2, the engagement was off. Charlotte's college friends started commenting on her Instagram posts, which she'd always carefully curated to show her perfect life. Under a photo of her at brunch, "This you treating people like trash?" Under a selfie, "How's your housekeeper doing? Still making her stand while you eat?" She deleted the comments, then deleted the posts, then eventually deleted her entire account. But screenshots lived forever. Someone at her university created an account called Exposing Charlotte Morrison and reposted everything with commentary about privilege and cruelty. The local news picked it up. A reporter stood outside the Morrison house, doing a segment about domestic workers' rights, and using our video as the centerpiece. This footage has sparked a national conversation about how we treat the people who work in our homes. Advocacy groups are calling for stronger labor protections. The family in question has declined to comment. They showed the video again, my face blurred for privacy. But everyone who knew me recognized my posture, my worn clothes, my exhaustion. Suddenly, the Morrison family's perfect image was crumbling, and they were desperate to stop it. That's when they came for me, but not with apologies, not with remorse, with accusations. I was in the kitchen making lunch, trying to focus on the simple task of chopping vegetables. The knife felt heavy in my hand. Everything felt heavy. I'd barely slept since the video started circulating, waiting for the other shoe to drop, knowing the Morrisons would retaliate somehow. Charlotte came in first, her mother and Olivia following close behind. All 3 had the same expression, a mix of fury and calculation. They'd planned this, I realized, coordinated it. "Grace?" Mrs. Morrison said coldly, her voice sharp as broken glass. "I need you to empty your pockets." I stared at her, the knife still in my hand, vegetables half chopped on the board. "What?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. Olivia stepped forward, holding up her phone with a photo of a diamond necklace, the one Mrs. Morrison had given her for her birthday last year. It had cost more than I'd make in 5 years. This went missing from my room this morning. Mother's already called the police. My heart dropped into my stomach, my hands going numb. The knife clattered onto the cutting board. I didn't take anything. I haven't even been upstairs yet today. I've been down here since 6 cooking breakfast. Charlotte smirked, that cruel twist of lips I'd come to know so well. Check her apron. Her voice was triumphant, gleeful even. She was enjoying this. Mrs. Morrison reached over and pulled at my apron pocket. Something heavy shifted, then fell out and clattered on the tile floor. The necklace. Diamonds caught the light, scattering rainbow reflections across the kitchen floor. My vision blurred with tears. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. I didn't. I swear, someone put that there. My voice was rising, panic making it shrill. I would never. I haven't stolen anything. Please, you have to believe me. But Mrs. Morrison was already pulling out her phone, her face set in grim satisfaction. I want her arrested. We've been more than generous with this girl, giving her a job when no one else would. And this is how she repays us? By stealing? The police came. 2 officers, one older with kind eyes, one younger who looked bored. They questioned me in the living room while I shook so hard I could barely speak, my words tumbling over each other. The officers looked uncomfortable, glancing at each other as Charlotte dramatically recounted finding the necklace missing that morning. I woke up and went to my jewelry box, and it was just gone. I knew immediately it had to be Grace. Who else could it be? She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, performing grief she didn't feel. The older officer, his name tag read Rodriguez, asked me directly, "Did you take this necklace, miss?" I met his gaze, forcing myself to hold it, even though I wanted to look away, wanted to disappear. No, sir. I've never stolen anything in my life. I swear on my mother's grave. My voice cracked on the word mother. Someone put that in my pocket. I didn't even know it was there. He nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. He'd seen the viral video. I could tell by the way he looked at the Morrisons, a hint of distaste in his eyes. He turned to Mrs. Morrison. "We'll need to investigate this properly. Check for fingerprints on the necklace. Review any security footage you might have. Interview everyone in the house. In the meantime, do you want to press charges?" Mrs. Morrison opened her mouth, and I saw the word yes forming. But Olivia grabbed her arm, leaned in close, and whispered urgently. I caught the words, "more bad press," and "video," and "make it worse." Mrs. Morrison's face went white as she processed the implications. Press charges, and the story would explode again. "Rich family falsely accuses grieving housekeeper of theft," would be the headline. More videos, more news coverage, more damage. She turned back to the officer with a forced smile that looked more like a grimace. "Actually, perhaps we were mistaken. These things happen. Maybe Olivia just misplaced it. Grace, you're dismissed. Pack your things and leave immediately." The older officer frowned. "Ma'am, if no crime was committed," Mrs. Morrison's voice went hard. "She no longer works here. That's my right as an employer. Officer, I think we're done. I was thrown out with nowhere to go and no money. The Morrisons made sure every household in their social circle knew I was a thief, spreading the lie through their network with vicious efficiency. I couldn't get another job. I applied everywhere, but word traveled fast in those circles. We're looking for someone more trustworthy," one woman told me, her nose wrinkling like I smelled bad. "We heard about the incident with the Morrisons. We can't risk that kind of person in our home." I moved into a tiny room above a laundromat, the only place I could afford with my rapidly dwindling savings. The room was barely bigger than a closet, with peeling wallpaper and a hot plate for cooking. The smell of detergent and steam seeped through the floorboards at all hours. The laundromat owner, Mr. Chen, took pity on me and let me have it for almost nothing. "Pay me when you can," he said, his eyes kind behind thick glasses. "Everyone needs a break sometimes." I spent my days applying for work, and my nights wondering how my life had collapsed so completely. I thought about my mother constantly, about how I'd failed her, how I'd let these people take everything from me, including my chance to say goodbye, about how she'd be so disappointed to see where I'd ended up, about how all her sacrifices had led to this, her daughter sleeping above a laundromat, unable to find work, falsely accused of theft, with nothing and no one. Rage built inside me like pressure in a sealed container, not the hot, explosive kind that burns out quickly. The cold, calculated kind that waits for the right moment. The kind that plans. I'd lie awake at night in that tiny room, listening to the washing machines churning below, and imagine different scenarios, confronting them publicly, exposing their cruelty in detail, taking legal action. But I had no money for lawyers, no platform for exposure, no power at all, until Mrs. Morrison called. That moment came 3 weeks later. I was sitting on my narrow bed, eating ramen noodles straight from the pot because I had no bowls, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Grace?" Mrs. Morrison's voice, strained, trying for warmth but landing somewhere near panic. "It's Elizabeth Morrison. How are you, dear?" Dear? She'd never called me dear in 6 months of working for her. "I'm fine," I said flatly, my hand tightening on the phone. She continued, words tumbling out faster than usual. "Grace, I think we may have been hasty about the whole necklace situation. A misunderstanding, really. We'd love for you to come back. We'll even give you a raise, 20% more than before, and proper days off. We've realized how valuable you were to our household." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch, imagining her squirming on the other end. She couldn't stand silence, always needed to fill it. "The thing is," she went on, more desperate now, "that video has caused some unfortunate complications. Completely unfair, of course. People don't understand context. But if you could, perhaps, if you were willing, we thought maybe you could help us record a short statement, just explaining that we treated you wonderfully, that the video was taken out of context, that you were happy working here, for social media, to clear things up, help people see the real story." There it was. They didn't want me back. They wanted me to save their reputation, to lie for them after everything they'd done, to smile for a camera and say how wonderful they were, how grateful I was, how that video didn't show the real story, to become complicit in my own degradation. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles went white. "I'll think about it," I said flatly, and hung up before she could respond. I did think about it. For days, I thought about nothing else. The room above the laundromat became my thinking chamber, steam rising through the floorboards while I paced and considered. Part of me wanted to just walk away, to let karma do its work, to be the bigger person my mother raised me to be. She'd always said, "Baby, you respond to hate with love. That's how you win." But my mother was gone, and love hadn't protected her. Love hadn't given her a daughter by her side when she died. Another part, the part that had stood for 2 hours in that restaurant, that had missed her mother's final words, that had been called a thief and thrown away like garbage, that part wanted something else. Justice felt too clean a word for what I wanted. Revenge felt too hot, too impulsive. What I wanted was colder, more calculated. I wanted them to feel, even for a moment, the degradation they'd put me through. I wanted them to understand, viscerally, what it meant to consume something toxic, to take something into themselves that poisoned from within. And then I had an idea. It came to me at 3 a.m, lying in that narrow bed, listening to the last load of laundry churning below. It was horrible. It was perfect. And I knew with absolute certainty that I was going to do it. The moral line I'd been walking my whole life, the one my mother had taught me never to cross, suddenly seemed less important than making them understand. Just once, just for a moment, what it felt like to be me. I called Mrs. Morrison back 2 days later. My voice was calm, measured. I'd practiced this conversation 100 times. "I'll help you," I said, "but I want to do it right. Let me come by tomorrow. I'll bring a peace offering, something to show there's no hard feelings. Something homemade. Then we can record your statement properly, make it look genuine." I could hear the relief flooding through the phone line, almost palpable. "Oh, Grace, that's so mature of you. So gracious. Yes, tomorrow would be perfect. Come around noon. We'll have lunch together, like civilized people." I spent the next 24 hours preparing. I went to the grocery store with money I couldn't afford to spend, buying ingredients for a chocolate cake. The good ingredients. Real butter, expensive cocoa powder, pure vanilla extract. I wanted it to look perfect, taste perfect, be absolutely irresistible. While it cooled on my hot plate, filling the tiny room with the rich smell of chocolate, I did something I'm not proud of. Something I'll never be able to take back. Something that changed me fundamentally. I collected my own waste in a container, mixed it carefully into the batter, kneading it in until it was indistinguishable from the chocolate. The smell was masked by cocoa and vanilla and butter. The texture was perfect, rich and moist. I decorated it with fresh strawberries, created a ganache from real chocolate, dusted the top with powdered sugar. It looked like something from a professional bakery window, the kind of cake you'd see in a magazine spread. Beautiful, irresistible, poisoned with my rage and my humiliation, and every degrading moment they'd inflicted on me. I placed it carefully in a white bakery box I'd bought specifically for this purpose, tied it with a silk ribbon. Looking at it, you'd never know. You'd see only generosity, only reconciliation, only Grace being the bigger person and extending an olive branch. That's what made it perfect. That's what made it unforgivable. The next day, I stood on the Morrison family's doorstep with my poisoned gift, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I dressed carefully, wearing my best clothes, the ones I'd worn to job interviews back when I still had hope. I wanted to look dignified, recovered, like someone who'd moved past their hurt. Mrs. Morrison opened the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the practiced smile of someone who'd spent her whole life pretending. "Grace, come in, come in. It's so good to see you." Her voice dripped with false warmth. Both daughters were there, dressed casually but expensively as always. Charlotte wore designer jeans that probably cost more than my rent. Olivia had on a cashmere sweater in soft pink. They'd set up the living room carefully, I noticed. Flowers on the table, the good china laid out, everything positioned to look welcoming and warm for the video they planned to record. They were staging reconciliation like it was a scene in a movie. The living room felt different now. Smaller somehow, less intimidating. I'd spent so many hours cleaning this space, terrified of Mrs. Morrison's white glove test, of missing a speck of dust that would cost me money. Now I stood here as a guest, or at least pretending to be one, and saw it for what it was. Just a room. Expensive, yes, but just a room. The people in it were just people. Cruel people, but not gods. Not untouchable. I held out the cake box, watching their faces light up with what looked like genuine pleasure. They thought they'd won. Thought they'd broken me enough that I'd come crawling back, grateful for any scrap of approval they'd throw my way. "I made this for you," I said, my voice steady, "as a thank you for the opportunity you gave me, for everything I learned working here." The words tasted like acid, but I smiled as I said them. Mrs. Morrison's face lit up, taking the box from my hands. "How thoughtful, Grace. How very thoughtful." She opened it carefully, and all three of them leaned in to admire the cake. "Oh my God, it's gorgeous," Charlotte breathed, actually sounding impressed. Olivia nodded enthusiastically. "Grace, this is beautiful. Like, legitimately beautiful. I didn't know you could bake like this." Mrs. Morrison beamed at me. "Shall we have some before we film? Make it feel more authentic, more like a real reconciliation?" My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, feel it in my throat. This was the moment. I could still stop this. Could say I needed to use the bathroom and pour the cake down the disposal. Could confess what I'd done and face whatever consequences came. Could choose to be the person my mother raised me to be. "Please," I heard myself say instead. "Help yourselves. I made it special just for you." They cut generous slices, the knife sliding through the perfect crumb. Mrs. Morrison transferred them to the good china plates, the ones I'd washed by hand 1,000 times. She handed them out with that hostess smile, the one she used at her charity events. They settled into their seats, the afternoon light streaming through the windows I'd cleaned until they were invisible. Everything was perfect. Everything was staged. Everything was about to shatter. Mrs. Morrison took the first bite, closing her eyes in what looked like genuine pleasure. "Delicious," she murmured, opening her eyes to smile at me. "Grace, you really do have talent. This is restaurant quality." Charlotte and Olivia dug in eagerly, making appreciative noises. "So moist," Charlotte said, taking another large bite. Olivia nodded, her mouth full. "The frosting is incredible. What's in this?" I watched them eat, bite after bite, complimenting the richness, the moistness, the perfect balance of flavors. They talked between bites about how we'd frame the video, what I should say, how grateful I should appear. "Maybe mention how we were like family to you," Mrs. Morrison suggested, licking chocolate from her fork. "How we gave you opportunities you wouldn't have had otherwise," Olivia added, "and definitely say the video was misleading, that you were standing by choice, that we offered you a seat but you preferred to stand." They finished their slices and reached for seconds. Charlotte cut herself an especially large piece. I can't help it, this is too good. They were so focused on their redemption, so consumed with plotting their return to social acceptability, they didn't notice I hadn't touched the cake, didn't notice how still I'd become, how my hands were clenched in my lap, knuckles white, didn't notice the expression on my face slowly changing from fake pleasantness to something colder, harder. When they'd finished, when crumbs littered their designer plates and satisfaction settled on their faces like a mask, I spoke. My voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was something underneath it that made them all look up. There's something I need to tell you about that cake. They looked at me, smiling, expectant, chocolate still on their lips. Mrs. Morrison dabbed at her mouth with a linen napkin. A secret ingredient? Do share, dear. I'd love to make this myself. I met her eyes, held her gaze. It was me, my waste, my shit, to be specific, mixed into every bite you just ate. The words hung in the air like smoke, taking a moment to register. The smiles froze on their faces, confusion replacing pleasure. Charlotte's fork clattered onto her plate. What? Her voice was small, uncertain, like she'd heard wrong. You heard me correctly, I continued, my voice still calm, still steady. I collected my own feces and mixed it into the batter, kneaded it in thoroughly. You just ate my shit. All of you. Seconds even. Olivia's hand went to her mouth, her face going from pink to white in seconds. Mrs. Morrison just stared, the words not quite landing yet, her brain refusing to process what I'd said. You're joking, Mrs. Morrison whispered, her voice cracking. This is some kind of sick joke. I shook my head slowly, deliberately. I'm not joking. I've never been more serious in my life. You spent months treating me like I was less than human, less than dirt. You made me stand for hours like furniture. You kept me from my dying mother. You framed me as a thief and destroyed my ability to work. So I wanted you to know what it feels like to consume something disgusting, to have something toxic inside you that you can't get out, to understand, even for a moment, what you made me feel every single day I worked here. The reality crashed over them like a wave. Charlotte bolted from her chair, knocking it over in her haste, and ran for the bathroom. The sound of violent retching echoed through the hallway. Olivia followed, gagging, her hand clamped over her mouth. Mrs. Morrison sat frozen, her face cycling through disbelief, horror, and rage in rapid succession. Her skin had taken on a grayish tone, sweat beading on her forehead. You can't. This is assault, she finally managed, her voice shaking. I'll have you arrested. You'll go to prison. She stopped, clapping her hand over her mouth as her own stomach rebelled. But she didn't run. She sat there, trembling, staring at me with eyes full of hate and horror, and finally, something that might have been understanding. I stood up slowly, deliberately, picking up my bag. My hands were steady now, my heart rate returning to normal. Go ahead, I said quietly. Call the police. Tell them you ate a cake I baked. Explain why. Explain that viral video. Explain how you treated your housekeeper so badly that she felt this was the only way to make you understand what you'd done. I'm sure that'll go great for you. More headlines. More outrage. Rich family that humiliated worker now claims she poisoned them. I can see it now. Mrs. Morrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She was trapped, and she knew it. Any action she took would only make things worse, would only shine more light on their cruelty. The sound of Charlotte and Olivia being sick continued from the bathroom, punctuated by crying. Besides, I continued, my voice dropping lower, more intense, it wasn't actually poison. You're not in danger. You're just disgusted, violated, humiliated, exactly how you made me feel every single day. The difference is, this will pass for you. You'll shower, brush your teeth, take some medicine, and eventually forget. But I'll never forget watching my mother die alone. Never forget standing in that restaurant. Never forget being called a thief when you planted that necklace. So really, who got off easier? I walked toward the door, and Mrs. Morrison made no move to stop me. She just sat there, trembling, her face gray, her perfect world crumbling around her like sand. At the door, I turned back one last time. I won't be recording any statement. You'll have to fix your reputation on your own. But maybe start by learning that the people who serve you are human beings. We're not furniture. We're not disposable. We're not things you can use and throw away. We have mothers who die. We have dignity. We have limits. And we remember every single way you make us feel small. The sound of my footsteps on their perfect marble floor was the last thing I heard as I left that house. Behind me, fresh waves of retching echoed from the bathroom, and Mrs. Morrison finally got up and ran to join her daughters. I walked down that pristine driveway, past the manicured lawns, past the expensive cars, past the facade of perfection they'd built so carefully. I walked out of their neighborhood and their world with my head high for the first time in months. I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, no relief, just a cold, empty sense of something completed. The act itself didn't heal me. Revenge never does. It doesn't fill the hole left by loss, or erase the scars left by degradation. But it did something else. It marked a line between who I'd been, someone who accepted degradation as the price of survival, and who I was becoming, someone who understood that dignity wasn't something others could grant or take away. It was something you claimed for yourself, whatever the cost. The weeks that followed were difficult in ways I hadn't anticipated. I waited for police to show up at my door, for lawyers to serve papers, for some kind of retaliation, but nothing came. The Morrisons, it seemed, had decided that pursuing me would only bring more attention to how they'd treated me, would only reopen wounds they desperately wanted to heal. The video continued to circulate, spawning articles and think pieces about domestic workers' rights and class discrimination. It took on a life of its own, becoming a symbol of something larger than just our story. I got calls from advocacy groups, from journalists wanting interviews, from lawyers who wanted to help me sue for wrongful termination and defamation. I declined them all. What I'd done lived in a moral gray space I didn't want to examine too closely in public. I'd crossed a line, a serious one, and I had to live with that knowledge alone. Going public would mean confessing what I'd done, and while part of me felt it was justified, another part knew it was indefensible. I couldn't be both victim and perpetrator in the public eye. I had to choose. But something else happened too. Something unexpected. Other domestic workers started reaching out through social media, through community centers, through word of mouth. They shared their own stories of mistreatment, of unpaid wages, of dignities stripped away day by day. A woman named Maria told me about working for a family who made her sleep in an unheated garage. Another, Susan, described being forbidden from using the family's bathroom and having to walk to a gas station down the street. James, one of the few male domestic workers I met, talked about being called slurs and having objects thrown at him when cleaning wasn't perfect. I realized my situation wasn't unique. It was systemic. The Morrisons weren't monsters, not really. They were just people who'd been taught that some humans mattered less than others, that wealth was permission to treat service workers as subhuman. They'd grown up in a world that reinforced these beliefs at every turn, that told them their comfort was more important than someone else's dignity. And they'd never been challenged on it until everything fell apart. They'd never had to think about the housekeeper as a person with a dying mother, with feelings, with a breaking point. I started volunteering at a workers' rights organization, using my experience to help others advocate for themselves in healthier ways than I had. I spoke at community centers, not about what I'd done to the Morrisons. I kept that secret locked tight, but about what had been done to me, about the restaurant incident, the missed goodbye with my mother, the false theft accusation. People listened. They shared their own stories. Slowly, connections formed. Support systems built themselves organically. The organization helped workers negotiate fair wages, proper time off, written contracts that protected them. We role-played difficult conversations with employers. We connected people with legal resources when they were cheated or abused. I found purpose in this work, found a way to channel my rage and grief into something constructive. It didn't erase what I'd done, but it balanced the scales slightly. For every act of revenge, maybe I could create 10 acts of justice. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild my life. I found work at a small bakery called Rosa's, a family-owned place in a neighborhood where people knew struggle intimately. The owner, an older woman named Rosa, whose hands were gnarled from decades of kneading dough, treated me like family from day one. She paid me fairly, always on time, no deductions for imaginary infractions. She asked about my day, my life, my dreams. She remembered my mother's death anniversary and gave me the day off without me asking. She remembered I didn't like mushrooms and never put them in the staff meal. She saw me as human. The first time she gave me a week off without question when I told her I needed it, I cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes. I'd forgotten that work could be dignified, that employers could be kind, that the basic decency my mother had taught me to expect wasn't naive but normal. Rosa found me crying and wrapped me in a hug that smelled like flour and vanilla. "Mija," she said softly, "whoever hurt you before, they were wrong. You understand? Wrong about who you are. Wrong about what you deserve. You're good. You're valuable. Don't forget that." I got my own apartment eventually. Nothing fancy, but mine. A one-bedroom in an older building with radiator heat and windows that stuck. But it was mine. No one could kick me out. No one could tell me where to eat or sleep or how to spend my free time. I decorated it slowly, piece by piece, with photos of my mother, with thrift store furniture I refinished myself, with plants I learned to keep alive. Some nights I talked to my mother's picture, apologizing for not being there, promising to honor her sacrifice by living better than I'd been living. "Mama," I'd say, sitting on my secondhand couch with a cup of tea, "I did something terrible, something you'd be ashamed of. But I'm trying to do better now, trying to help people the way you always did. I hope that counts for something." The photo never answered, of course, but sometimes I felt her presence, felt her understanding if not her approval. She'd always said that being human meant making mistakes, and that growth came from acknowledging them and changing. The transformation wasn't dramatic or complete. I still had nightmares about that house, about standing in that restaurant while wealthy diners pretended not to see me, about the moment my mother died without me holding her hand. I'd wake up gasping, covered in sweat, the guilt and rage still fresh. I still struggled with anger that would spike unexpectedly, hot and sharp, when I saw injustice or cruelty. A customer being rude to a server, someone cutting in front of an elderly person in line. Small things that reminded me how easily people dismiss those they consider beneath them. But I also started to understand something crucial, something that took months of reflection to fully grasp. What I'd done to the Morrisons didn't balance any scales. It didn't undo their cruelty or bring back the time I'd lost with my mother. It didn't erase the humiliation or heal the wounds. It just added more pain to a world already drowning in it. The real victory, I realized slowly, would have been walking away and refusing to let them make me into someone capable of that level of calculated cruelty. But I hadn't been strong enough for that. I'd needed to make them feel something, anything, even if it meant diminishing myself in the process. The story could end there, with that bitter lesson learned, with me rebuilding in solitude and regret. But life is rarely that simple, rarely that clean. 6 months after I left the Morrison house for the last time, I was at the grocery store, navigating the produce section, when I saw Olivia. She was alone, looking somehow smaller than I remembered, her designer clothes hanging a bit loose like she'd lost weight. Her hair wasn't as perfectly styled. She wore less makeup. She looked, I realized with surprise, more human. We made eye contact across a display of apples. She froze, her hand suspended over a piece of fruit. I watched her face cycle through fear, shame, and something that might have been regret. For a moment, I thought she'd run. I almost hoped she would, honestly, because I wasn't sure what to say if she approached. But instead, she put down her shopping basket and walked over, her steps hesitant, her eyes downcast. "Grace," she said quietly when she reached me. Her voice was different, softer, stripped of the entitled edge I remembered. I wanted to say." She stopped, searching for words, her hands twisting together nervously. "I'm sorry. For all of it. What we did to you was inexcusable." She finally looked up, meeting my eyes, and I saw genuine remorse there. Not the desperate kind born from consequences, but the deep kind that comes from true reflection. "I've been thinking about it every day. About the video, about how we treated you, about your mother. I'm so sorry." I stood there, my own basket hanging from my arm, not sure what to say. Part of me wanted to walk away, to deny her the absolution she was seeking. Another part was curious, wanted to hear more. "Charlotte and I moved out," she continued, words tumbling out like she'd been holding them in for months. "We're working regular jobs now, real jobs, not just sitting on boards or planning charity events. I'm a receptionist at a dental office. Charlotte works retail. We're trying to understand what it's actually like to work, to have a boss, to depend on a paycheck. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening, and my engagement ended. Not just because of the video, but because I realized the person I was becoming, the person my mother raised me to be, wasn't someone I wanted to be. Bradley saw that before I did. He told me I was cruel, and didn't even know it. He was right. She paused, taking a shaky breath. I know you have no reason to forgive me. I just needed you to know that what happened changed me. I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to understand what you went through, what people like you go through every day. I stood there in the frozen food aisle, fluorescent lights humming overhead, holding a basket of groceries, and felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly. That felt too big, too soon, maybe impossible, but maybe the beginning of it, the possibility of it. The recognition that people could change, could grow, could become something other than what they'd been. I did something terrible to you, I said quietly, my voice steady. To all of you. I put my own pain into hurting you, and that wasn't right either. Olivia nodded, tears spilling over now. I know. We never reported it because we deserved it. Because maybe that's the only way we would have understood. Sometimes people need to feel the consequences of their actions to really change. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. Charlotte had therapy for months. She was traumatized, but she also said it was the first time she'd ever really thought about how her actions affected other people. The first time she'd felt powerless and violated. She said she finally understood what she'd been doing to you. We stood there awkwardly for another moment, shoppers moving around us, life continuing its mundane flow. I hope you're doing okay, Grace, Olivia said finally, her voice sincere. I really do. You deserved so much better than what we gave you. I'm sorry it took something so extreme to make us see that. She gave a small, sad smile, then picked up her basket and walked away, disappearing into the next aisle. That encounter stayed with me for weeks, replaying in my mind at odd moments. It complicated the narrative I'd built about villains and victims, about justified revenge and righteous anger. The Morrisons had been cruel, yes, thoughtlessly, systematically cruel, but they'd also been people, products of their upbringing and social class, capable of change when finally forced to confront what they'd become. And I'd been a victim, yes, but I'd also been capable of profound cruelty when pushed far enough, capable of violating someone in ways that would haunt them. The truth was messier than any simple moral could capture. We're all capable of both inflicting and receiving pain. We're all responsible for choosing, every day, which side of that equation we want to live on. The Morrisons had chosen cruelty through neglect and thoughtlessness. I'd chosen cruelty through calculation and pain. Both were wrong. Both had consequences. Both required acknowledging and changing. I think about my mother often, especially on quiet nights in my apartment when the city sounds fade and I'm alone with my thoughts, about what she'd think of what I did. Part of me believes she'd understand the rage, the need to make them see me as human, the desperation of having lost her, and feeling like I had nothing left to lose. She'd experienced her own share of degradation working for wealthy families, her own moments of swallowed rage and silent humiliation. But I also know she'd be disappointed. She raised me to be better than my circumstances, to respond to cruelty with dignity, rather than descending to match it. Baby, she used to say, when someone treats you like dirt, you don't roll around in the mud with them. You stand up, brush yourself off, and walk away with your head high. That's how you win. That's how you keep your soul. I failed that test. I rolled in the mud. I became, for that moment, as cruel as they'd been. Maybe more so, because my cruelty was intentional, calculated, designed to wound. But maybe that failure taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. That revenge doesn't heal wounds. It creates new ones. That diminishing others doesn't elevate us. It lowers us to their level. That the only real power we have is the choice to not let cruelty turn us cruel. It's a lesson I'm still learning, still practicing every day. Some days, I do better than others. Some days I see injustice and respond with compassion instead of rage. Other days the anger wins, and I have to step back, breathe, remind myself that I don't want to be that person anymore. The domestic workers I've met through my advocacy work have stories that make mine look mild. Women who've been physically abused, locked in rooms, denied food as punishment. Women who've been sexually harassed by employers who knew they had no recourse, no power to refuse. Women who've had their passports stolen, been threatened with deportation if they complained about conditions. Men who've been worked 18-hour days with no breaks, called slurs, treated like property instead of people. One woman, Anna, told me about working for a family where she slept on the kitchen floor and was expected to be available 24 hours a day. When she asked for a bed, she was told she should be grateful for a roof over her head. Another lay described being forbidden from speaking her native language in the house because it sounded unpleasant to her employers. She went months without speaking to her children back home because her employer refused to let her use the phone for international calls. The mistreatment of household workers is a massive, largely invisible crisis built on the assumption that some people's labor and dignity matter less than others. It's not just about individual bad employers, though they certainly exist. It's about a system that allows, even encourages, treating service workers as less than fully human. It's about laws that exclude domestic workers from basic labor protections. It's about social norms that make it acceptable to pay poverty wages for back-breaking work. It's about the invisible line we draw between us and them, between people who matter and people who serve. Every time we let someone stand while we sit, work while we rest, suffer while we enjoy comfort without acknowledging their humanity, we're participating in that system. Every time we pay below minimum wage under the table, deny time off for family emergencies, deduct wages for minor infractions, we're perpetuating cruelty. And every time we recognize the humanity in the people who serve us, treat them with respect, and pay them fairly, give them the same consideration we'd want for ourselves, we're chipping away at it. This story isn't a feel-good tale of justice served. It's messier than that, more complicated, more human. I hurt people who hurt me, and we all came out of it damaged in different ways. The Morrisons carry the trauma of what I did to them, a violation they'll probably never fully forget. I carry the weight of having become someone I swore I'd never be, someone capable of inflicting that kind of harm. We're all scarred by what happened in that house, in different ways, for different reasons. But here's what I hold on to, what keeps me moving forward on hard days. People can change. The Morrisons changed, or at least started to. Olivia's transformation, however it continues, represents the possibility that even people raised in cruelty can choose differently when confronted with the reality of their actions. Charlotte getting therapy, working retail, learning what it means to depend on others' approval for your livelihood. Mrs. Morrison losing her social standing and having to confront the hollowness of status without substance. And I changed too, learning boundaries I should have had from the start, learning that self-respect means walking away from situations that demand you shrink yourself, learning that there are healthier ways to reclaim power than through revenge. I learned that justice and vengeance are different things, that one heals communities, while the other just perpetuates cycles of harm. Maybe, just maybe, some people who hear this story will think twice about how they treat the invisible workers in their lives, the housekeepers who clean hotel rooms and offices, the delivery drivers who bring packages to doorsteps, the restaurant staff who serve meals, the caregivers who tend to children and elderly parents, the people who make modern life comfortable and convenient while often being treated like they're disposable, like they're not real people with real lives and real pain. If this story made you uncomfortable, good. It should. We live in a world where discrimination based on class and occupation is so normalized we barely notice it anymore, where we're trained to see service workers as background characters in our own stories rather than the protagonists of their own. My mother was a protagonist. She had dreams she never got to fulfill, fears she faced with courage, hopes that sustained her through impossible circumstances, a daughter she loved more than anything. But to the people she cleaned for, the people whose toilets she scrubbed and whose children she sometimes watched, she was just the help. Invisible, interchangeable, forgettable. When I stood in that restaurant for 2 hours, treated like a piece of furniture, while wealthy diners enjoyed their meals, I understood exactly how she felt for most of her working life, and I understood why she never told me the whole truth about her work, why she'd come home exhausted and silent, why she'd sometimes cry in the shower where she thought I couldn't hear. She was protecting me from that particular kind of degradation, that slow erosion of self that comes from being treated as less than human day after day after day. The hope in this story, if there is any, comes from knowing that awareness is the first step to change. The video that exposed the Morrisons also sparked thousands of conversations about workers' rights and human dignity. I've read articles, seen debates, watched people genuinely grapple with how they treat the people who serve them. Some of it is performative, sure, virtue signaling without real change. But some of it is real. Some people are actually changing their behavior, paying better, treating workers with more respect, recognizing the humanity they'd been trained to ignore. Olivia's transformation, however it continues, represents the possibility that even people raised in cruelty and entitlement can choose differently. That moment in the grocery store, her genuine remorse, her willingness to change her entire life, rather than continue being who she'd been, that matters. It doesn't erase what she did, but it shows that people aren't static. We can grow, we can learn, we can become better versions of ourselves if we're willing to do the uncomfortable work of self-examination. And my own journey, messy and ongoing as it is, shows that survival sometimes means making choices we're not proud of, but those choices don't have to define us forever. I crossed a line that day in my tiny room above the laundromat when I decided to bake that cake. I became someone my mother wouldn't recognize, someone capable of calculated cruelty. But that's not the end of my story. It's a chapter, a dark one, but not the conclusion. We can learn from our worst moments. We can grow beyond them. We can do better next time. I still bake, by the way. Every day at Rose's Bakery, I create things that bring people joy instead of pain. Cakes for birthdays and weddings, cookies for children's lunchboxes, bread that becomes family dinners. Each one is an act of creation, not destruction. I've reclaimed baking, taken it back from that dark moment, and made it something good again. The skill I learned out of desperation, trying to be perfect enough for people who would never value me, has become a source of joy and connection and honest work. Rosa taught me that food is love made visible. When you bake for someone, Mija, she says, you're saying, you matter to me. Your happiness matters. I took time from my life to create something just for you. That's sacred work. So now every cake I make carries that intention. Every loaf of bread, every batch of cookies. I'm putting love back into the world, one recipe at a time, trying to balance the scales of the harm I caused. Sometimes healing looks like that, like taking the tools of your trauma and building something new with them. It's not perfect. I'm not perfect. I never will be. But I'm trying, and I've learned that trying counts for something. That showing up every day and choosing to be better than you were yesterday is its own kind of victory. If you've made it this far, if this story resonated with you, or challenged you, or made you think about someone in your life differently, then maybe it was worth telling. Not the revenge part. I'll carry the weight of that choice forever. And I should. But the rest of it. The reality of how we treat each other when power imbalances exist. The importance of seeing the humanity in everyone, not just the people who look like us, or occupy similar social positions. The recognition that every person serving you, cleaning for you, working for you, is someone's whole world. Someone's mother or daughter or son. Someone with a story just as complex and painful and hopeful as yours. Share this story if you think someone needs to hear it. Not to glorify revenge, but to spark conversation about dignity and power and the invisible people who make our lives possible. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories that dig into the complicated truth of human nature, the moments where we fail spectacularly, and the moments where we find our way back to something resembling grace. Because here's the final truth I've learned through all of this. Every smile does hide a story. Every person you encounter is fighting battles you know nothing about, carrying pain you can't see, making impossible choices between survival and dignity. The least we can do, the very least, is treat each other like we matter. Because we do. All of us. Even the ones who clean your house while you're at work. Even the ones who stand in restaurants waiting for you to finish eating. Even the ones who miss their mother's last moments because you needed your silver polished for guests who probably won't even notice. Even the ones who break under the weight of cruelty and do something they can never take back. We all deserve dignity. We all deserve to be seen as fully human, with all the complexity and worth that implies. And we all have the power to give that to each other, one interaction at a time. That's not naive optimism or wishful thinking. It's the hard-won wisdom of someone who learned what happens when we forget. Someone who forgot it herself in a moment of rage and pain. someone who's trying to remember it every day since. So look at the people who serve you. Really look at them. Learn their names. Ask about their lives. Treat them like they're human, because they are. Pay them fairly. Give them time off. Don't make them choose between dignity and survival. And maybe, just maybe, we can build a world where no one has to go as far as I did to feel like they matter, where no one breaks under the weight of invisible cruelty, where we all remember that the person serving you today could be you tomorrow, because fortune is more fragile than we like to believe. That's the hope I'm holding on to. That's the story I'm trying to live now. One imperfect day at a time. One loaf of bread. One kind word. One moment of seeing someone else's humanity instead of looking past it. It doesn't erase what I did. Nothing will. But maybe it builds something new on top of those ashes. Maybe that's all any of us can do when we've failed our own moral standards. Acknowledge it, carry it, and try like hell to be better going forward. My mother used to say that life is long and full of chances to choose differently. I didn't get to tell her I was sorry for not being there. I didn't get to promise I'd honor her memory by living with integrity. But I can do it anyway. I can make that promise to her memory, to myself, to every person I meet. I can choose every day to see people, to value them, to treat them like they matter, because they do. That's my final word. That's what I want you to take from this complicated, messy, painful story. Not that revenge is justified or satisfying. It's neither. Not that cruelty deserves quarter, not that revenge is justified or satisfying. It's neither. Not that cruelty deserves cruelty. It doesn't. But that every person you encounter carries invisible weight, fights invisible battles, and deserves to be treated with basic human dignity. That's the lesson I learned the hard way, through loss and rage and a choice I'll regret for the rest of my life. The story doesn't end with redemption or closure, because real life rarely gives us those things wrapped neatly with a bow. It ends with me, 5 years later, still working at Rosa's Bakery, still volunteering with the workers' rights organization, still carrying the weight of what I did, but also carrying forward my mother's legacy in the ways I can. I haven't seen any of the Morrisons since that day in the grocery store with Olivia. I don't know if Mrs. Morrison ever truly understood what she'd done, or if she just learned to be more careful about how her cruelty looked to others. I don't know if Charlotte's therapy took root, or if she eventually slipped back into old patterns when the trauma faded. I only know that Olivia tried, and sometimes trying is all we can ask of each other. Last month, I hired my first employee at the bakery. Rosa's health isn't what it used to be, and she's slowly transitioning the business to me. A gift I never expected, one that still makes me cry when I think about it. The girl I hired, Maria, is 19, supporting her sick father, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. When I interviewed her, I saw myself at 23, desperate and willing to accept anything. I pay her well above minimum wage. I give her every other weekend off, no questions asked. When her father had an emergency last week, I told her to go, immediately, and I'd cover her shifts. The look on her face, surprise, relief, gratitude, reminded me why this matters. Why every choice we make about how we treat people ripples outward in ways we can't always see. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for understanding. Your father needs you," I replied simply. "Nothing is more important than that. Go." She left, and I worked her shift and mine, my feet aching by the end of the day. But it was a good ache, an earned one, the kind that comes from living your values instead of just talking about them. My mother would have been proud of that choice, at least. Maybe not of everything I've done, but of that. I'm not a hero in this story. I'm not even sure there is a hero. We're all just people, stumbling through life, trying to balance our own pain with our responsibility to others, sometimes succeeding and sometimes failing spectacularly. The Morrisons failed me. I failed myself and them, but we're all still here, still choosing, still capable of doing better. Every morning, I light a candle for my mother before I start baking. It's a small ritual, a private one, but it grounds me. "I'm trying, Mama," I whisper to the flame. "I'm trying to be the person you raised me to be. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here. I'm sorry for the detour through darkness, but I'm trying." The flame flickers, and I imagine it's her, acknowledging, forgiving, encouraging me forward, because that's what love does. It holds us accountable and offers grace in equal measure. It demands we be better while accepting that we're human. and will sometimes fall short. So here I am, 5 years later, still baking, still advocating, still trying to put more good into the world than harm, still carrying the memory of that cake like a stone in my pocket, a reminder of who I can become when I let pain drive my choices, but also carrying forward every lesson my mother taught me about resilience and dignity and the radical act of treating people like they matter. If you're listening to this story and you employ someone, a housekeeper, a nanny, a gardener, anyone who serves you in any capacity, I have one request. See them. Really see them. They're not just hands that clean or cook or care. They're entire worlds, with mothers who love them, dreams that keep them going, breaking points they're trying not to reach. Treat them accordingly. Pay them fairly. Give them grace. Remember that how you treat people when you have power over them is the truest measure of your character. And if you're listening to this story, and you are that worker, invisible and undervalued and barely hanging on, I see you. Your mother, if she's gone, would be proud that you're still here, still trying. Your pain is valid. Your anger is justified. But please, learn from my mistakes. Don't let cruelty turn you cruel. Don't let their failure to see your humanity convince you to stop seeing your own. Walk away if you need to. Fight for better if you can. But don't become them. Don't let them take that from you too. The world needs people who remember what it's like to be powerless and choose to wield power differently when they get it. Who remember what it's like to be invisible and choose to see others when they have the chance. Who remember what it's like to be treated as less than human and choose to affirm everyone's humanity in response. Be that person. Not perfectly. None of us can do it perfectly. But consistently. Intentionally. One choice at a time. That's the real ending to this story. Not revenge or redemption, but the quiet daily work of trying to be better than our worst moments. Of building something good on top of the ruins of our failures. Of remembering that every smile hides a story, and the least we can do is treat each other like those stories matter. Because they do. We all do. Even me, with my unforgivable choice, and my ongoing attempts at atonement. Even you, whoever you are, whatever you've done or had done to you. We all matter. Remember that tomorrow when you encounter someone serving you. Remember their humanity. Choose kindness. Choose dignity. Choose to see them. It's the least we can do for each other in this hard, complicated, beautiful life. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying until the end. And if this story changed something in you, even something small, then maybe all of this, the pain, the mistakes, the hard lessons, was worth it after all.